Everybody ready? It became clear to me that Mr. Price does not know or may not know that he has a warrant out for his arrest. He did not attend the hearing. I was unable to reach him after the hearing. And so I wanted to make it clear to Mr. Price, if he sees this, that my legal advice is that he needs to turn himself in. Although Mr. Price did nothing to deserve this, he was released legally from jail. He did not escape. He walked out with a judge's order. And despite the fact that the Supreme Court has ordered him back into custody, I wanted to make it clear to Mr. Price that he does need to turn himself in at this point. I've talked to his mother, who is elderly and infirm. She tells me that she's been in touch with law enforcement. They searched her house. She does not know where he is, and I don't know that anyone else does at this time. But I did, again, want Mr. Price to know that he needed to turn himself in. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that the Supreme Court ordered this, and I'm sorry for Mr. Price, who has done nothing but help the citizens of South Carolina capture a dangerous criminal, saving the lives of correctional officers, that somehow that lands him back in jail in the South Carolina Department of Corrections. And so at this point, I'll take any questions.
You said him going back to prison would be like a death sentence. Why now telling him to go back to prison?
Well, he doesn't have a choice at this point. The Supreme Court of South Carolina has ruled, and despite the fact that the solicitor in Richland County recognized that danger, tried to take that into account, the Supreme Court has currently overruled that order and ordered him back to prison. And so at this point, he does not have a choice.
When was the last time you had communication with Mr. Price?
Prior to the hearing on Wednesday, he and I spoke, and I just told him what was at stake, and that was the last time I talked to him.
Is Price's mother located here in Columbia?
I do not know. I had her phone number. She called me because the FBI, she believed, was outside her house. I don't know that that's who it was, but they did search her house. She's elderly and infirm, and I think that some of the law enforcement agents that I've talked to acknowledge that. They did search her house. She doesn't know where he is.
Do you feel like this whole situation is not dirty, a little cold, and letting the man free and then saying, oops, nope, your freedom's taken away?
I think it's beyond that. I think it's cruel. I think that someone that literally saves the lives of correctional officers, complies with the statute, tells us where a dangerous criminal is, and then somehow is let out of prison, not somehow let out of prison on a judge's order, and now somehow ordered to return back to prison after everybody finds out what he did. I think that is dangerous. I think his life is in jeopardy. I think he knew that prior to the hearing, and certainly even now it is still in jeopardy.
What do you say to those people that may say that Price himself may be a dangerous individual being let out back into the community early?
So I'm glad you asked that. I would say to them that they should go back and look at his trial. He went to trial because he believed he was innocent, because he believed he had a self-defense claim. He believed at that time so strongly that he was made an offer of 10 years. He rejected that offer and went to trial. Unfortunately, he was convicted in front of the worst sentencing judges in South Carolina's history, Judge Reggie Lloyd. Judge Reggie Lloyd once gave somebody over 300 years. He chose to give Mr. Price only 35, almost the minimum on a murder charge. Mr. Price was in the Department of Corrections for almost 10 years before they watched a TV show and decided that he must be a gang member. He was not declared a gang member at any time prior to somebody watching a TV show and believing that he was a gang member. They have nothing, even the evidence that they tried to show at trial that he was a gang member. The Supreme Court of South Carolina later said it was based on hearsay, but it was inadmissible error. And so at that point, Mr. Price was convicted. He has served almost 20 years of his sentence, 10 more than his original offer. He is not a dangerous individual. I think there are 3 at least correctional officers that would testify that he saved their lives, and 1 inmate that had escaped, was brought back into custody because of his help. So Mr. Price has done everything that a model citizen should have done while in the Department of Corrections, released on the judge's order, and now with his life being in jeopardy, is going to be placed right back in a spot where he tried so desperately to get out of.
Well, Mr. Rutherford, during that Supreme Court hearing on Wednesday, some of the justices mentioned that those accounts of Price offering substantial assistance to law enforcement were not fully investigated.
They were not fully investigated because the Department of Corrections did not keep proper records. And what we all know is that that is not Mr. Price's fault. All he can do is get correctional officers who he knows he had interactions with, who he knows he saved their lives, and we'd ask that they come forward, and the Department of Corrections bring them forward. But that is nothing that Mr. Price can do. That is nothing that I, even as a lawyer legislator, can do. I tried to investigate. That was the best that I could find. but they have used the very same evidence that Mr. Price gave them to prosecute individuals, to help them with the capture of another dangerous individual, and now he is placed right back in the Department of Corrections, the agency that he tried desperately to help.
Have you tried to reach out to him since that hearing?
I have, and have had no contact. And that's why I just don't know. And he knew prior to this because he consented. Again, the reason why the world knows the cooperation that Mr. Price gave is because he gave his consent to that information being released. We signed, myself and the solicitor, gave consent to the Supreme Court that that order be unsealed so that the world could see what he did, because he wanted people to know the extent to which he had gone to save a life and to save, again, not only the life of correctional officers, but also that of Mr. Swirling, a lawyer in Columbia who was tied up at gunpoint and robbed by Jimmy Lee Causey, who had robbed a bank, who had burglarized a home, already done prison time for that, and now had escaped for the second time that Mr. Price put his life on the line to bring Mr. Causey back in, and this is the thanks that he gets.
Now, Sheriff Lott mentioned the other day that Price is a danger to the community. Do you agree with that?
I do not. Sheriff Lott knows nothing about what happens inside the Department of Corrections other than what he's told. And what I would ask Sheriff Lott to do is to talk to the correctional officers whose lives were saved. What Sheriff Lott knows is that when Mr. Price went to trial, he was 22 years old and he had no prior record. And so I'm sorry, but 22-year-old individuals with no prior record who go to trial because they believe they have a valid self-defense claim don't get to be called dangerous by the sheriff who tried them just because at this point he served almost 20 years. That does not make him dangerous. At this point, he's not a danger to anyone other than Jimmy Lee Causey, who he placed back into prison.
Todd, has there been anything done to guarantee his safety if he is to turn himself back in?
What I think was most disappointing and I think most disheartening to anyone that watched was when the Attorney General of South Carolina, or the Attorney General's office, said that in order to keep him safe, they could place him in solitary confinement. So in order to keep safe the life of someone who helped the state of South Carolina, they're going to place him in solitary confinement, or they could ship him back out to New Mexico. That's the best that I've heard. Both of them still equate to either a death sentence or a life looking over your shoulder at all the inmates that know that he is the one that brought back one of the most dangerous individuals in South Carolina history.
By when was he released? Was he released by the New Mexico Department of Corrections in New Mexico?
He would have been released by the New Mexico Department of Corrections upon order of the South Carolina Department of Corrections, upon order of a judge.
And what was the last location you knew he was other than New Mexico?
I never knew where he was other than New Mexico, except I believe that when in talking to the Department of Corrections, I think he went through Texas. That's all that I know, and that's all I knew of his location. Because, again, up until the Supreme Court ruled, he was a free man, ordered free by a judge in South Carolina, using what we believe was a lawful order at the time, with the knowledge of the Solicitor of Richland County. So.
And that was my next question about the law itself. Somebody that's being convicted for murder with no chance for parole, is it against the law to be released early, or how does that play out?
The Supreme Court heard testimony on that, and it is up to the Supreme Court when they rule what their decision would be. In following the law of this state, in following Rule 35, which is what the law of this state is based on, it is clear to me that judges can go below the mandatory minimum of this state. It has been done several other times, not just in Mr. Price's case, but I believe that follows the law of this state as stated currently by the South Carolina General Assembly.
Have you had any conversations with the judge who signed the order previously, and how is he feeling about all of this?
Judge Manning is retired. He had a great and storied career on the bench, and he continues to have a storied career in retirement because he's one of the greatest judges that South Carolina ever had. It is routine for judges to be overruled on appeal. I haven't seen exactly what the Supreme Court is going to say, so I don't know whether they're going to say that there was an error in the order or an error in the filing of the order, because clearly that was not done correctly. But that's not the judge's fault. So.
Are you at liberty to speak of who all was involved with getting him released early in the first place?
He was released by a conversation between myself, the solicitor of this county, and Judge Manning, all of which is lawful and follows the statute, again, except whatever the Supreme Court decides in their ruling. All right. Thank you all so much.